I'm delighted to say I'm with the fabulous Alison Moyet. How are you?
Oh, it's been too long, isn't it? I'm really, really well.
That's good. I've got to say congratulations on your new album, Other.
Thank you.
Can I just say I squealed with joy at the news that you were working with Guy Zigsworth again.
Oh, did you?
He's one of my favourite producers, and I loved what he did with your album. You both worked on that in the minutes.
Oh, he's a brilliant person for me to work with because is art foremost for him, and he gets me. I haven't got to explain myself to him. There's like a whole language that's that we know that we don't even have to use. If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a good marriage, isn't it?
It's a really good marriage.
Good marriage and music.
Yeah.
Was there anything that was different this time around? Because with the minutes, it's such a fantastic album. The new one, I would say, is a little bit different.
It is a little bit different. Yeah, it's probably more experimental in some ways. No, I think that the hardest thing is then to figure out about how not to recreate what you've done before and to try and make that journey continue, really. And I think we managed that.
And it is an interesting title, because you cover a lot of subjects in this album, but diversity is one of those.
Yeah. Diversity is probably the main element of it, yeah.
As a whole, lyrically, is it something that you feel more courageous about talking about and singing about?
No, I've never felt. I've never not felt courageous about it. Like going back to Whispering Your Name, where I didn't change the gender in that. No, and as we know, diversity comes in many different forms. It's just, it's not just sexual. It's social. There's lots of ways that we are diverse and that we connect with other minority groups for understanding that. So it's not been a case about feeling more brave. I just think it's about age and the language you use in age. When you're younger, you're more bothered by the language of romance, and as an older woman, that's not what does it for me. I've moved to Brighton 4 years ago, which made a big impact on my writing, because instead of being completely introspective, I've actually started to being more voyeuristic. There's a lot of watching, a lot of feeling, and a lot of empathising, I think.
A very poetic title for one of the tracks off the album, Reassuring Pinches, which I've got to say is my favourite track on the album.
Wonderful.
It was the real standout.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's so dramatic too, the production and the music.
It's interesting how this album, really divides everyone. There's almost like there's no natural single, and, favourites are very different between people. But I love that, because this is not an album of songs that are just designed for everything to be a single. This is, an album in the old sense of the word. It has kind of a concept. It has a poetic concept. And as such, I think different things are going to strike different people.
Yeah, I've heard different things each time I've listened to it. Yeah. I don't think it's an album that is necessarily instant.
No, it's not.
I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I think it's something that will grow over time. It's got longevity.
It's kind of the difference between an art house film and Hollywood. You might sort of like get more people want to go and see the Hollywood film, but it might resonate less.
Yeah. Another standout track, April 10th. Talking of poetry, that's kind of spoken word.
It is spoken word,
It's a little bit different, isn't it?
Well, it's because I didn't want to amputate the poem, and there's so many times that you have to do that to put it into a song format, which is something I've tried to avoid on this album, which is why we've got some pretty long tracks going on there. But with this one, I had a real fidelity to the poem and just didn't want to edit it, so I thought, well, that's it. I'm not going to mush it into any particular reoccurring shape, so I'm going to speak it.
Is that something you're going to do live? Because you've got the tour coming up.
I don't know, because I mean the problem that I have having been around for 35 years is I've got a big back catalogue, and people want to experience things from all that, all of those things. So I can't just indulge myself by doing I could do my last two albums, which I love my last two albums, but they take up the whole space, and I'm not in a position where I can do that at this point in time. So I might be limited.
Bananarama announced a comeback. They're touring later in the year.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were your contemporaries back in the 80s. Yeah. Very powerful female, still going strong today, like yourself. Did you get on back in the 80s? Do you still get on now?
I didn't really know all the girls. I met Siobhan a couple of times, and she was lovely. I really liked her. But I liked the aesthetic of Bananarama, I liked the fact that they were a little bit rough around the edges, they were our beautiful girl band, but at the same time they were women that we understood, women that we lived next door to, and women who had a bit of a mouth on them. And I like that, I like the fact that they didn't prettify everything.
Post-punk girls, like yourself.
They were post-punk girls, exactly that. Yeah.
And also Yazoo, because you must get asked so many times, and obviously that's where your roots are, so you're very proud of that. But do you get bored about thinking back? Because I know you're a forward-looking person.
No, not anymore. No, I don't. It's funny. There were times when I found it frustrating when you're not allowed to move beyond those things. And I found that more irritating probably with my early solo material than even with Yazoo, because Yazoo was. it did have an artistic front. You know what I mean? It's like, other than the language sometimes where I think, okay, it's a bit hard for me to sing those words just because it's a nonsense for someone of my experience. I can really get into it, I think the biggest problem I had was when I was close to that material where I wasn't allowed to move beyond it. Now that I've been accepted as an artist beyond the 80s, then I can accept the 80s again. Because that was the only thing that frustrated me. So when people call you an 80s singer, it's like, you're denying my growth. And I know that within that time I've learned a lot of things and I've developed in a big way.
Can we talk about theatre work? Because we saw you in Chicago.
Oh, yeah, did you?
As Mama Morton, you were fantastic.
Oh,
and with Dawn French, your mate Dawn.
Yeah, well, we always intended to do something that we could be together with, that we could tour together with. And, Smaller was a big learning curve for me. It was a 3-part play, and I was the lesser of the 3 parts, but completely new discipline and fascinating.
It's another work marriage, isn't it? You with Dawn. It's like you with Guy.
Dawn's, Dawn, we've been like best mates since we were like I met her when I was 21, and she's been such a, we're such confidants, and I love the bones of her. So anytime I'm around her, never feels long enough.
Her recent show was fantastic.
Oh yeah. It's wonderful, really, really wonderful.
And the books,
and the books, and the TV show that she did, and a one-woman show. Yeah, and this is a frustrating thing within music. Is that you get old and people forget that in all art forms, you hone a craft. As long as you're keeping your motivation straight and you're not thrown by a lessening in profile. It's you're learning all the time.
I love the fact that she's delving into the darker side of her work too.
There's always, I think there's always been that.
Yeah.
I think it must be really hard when you're a comedian anyway, that people just, expect to see one side of you. And, she's a very funny woman, but when she and I are together, it's rarely about laughing. It's just about really, dissecting the minutiae of our lives, and talking, togetherness.
Are you very similar as people?
No, not entirely. No, we're not. We're both very loyal to one another. But she's far more effective. She's focused. She'll remember dates. She's very organised with her social life. She's all brilliant like that. I let everything fall. So in that sense, no. I'm probably more neurotic than she is. But she calls me wise. I like that she calls me wise.
That's great. Would you do theatre work again? Is it not really your priority at the moment?
No, I would do theatre work again. I would do all of the arts. I would do all of the arts again.
Because you're doing sculpture.
I am. That's what I'm doing during the daytime, funny enough. So it's been a really interesting thing doing this album, because daytime I've been doing sculpture. In the evenings I've been recording. The weekends I've been writing. So it's bizarre. You think, I'm a world-class sofa sitter. Do you know what I mean? I can annihilate time just wonderfully.
Without knowing
and showing nothing for it. And yet I get these... It's a bit like my conversation, it's like I'm like that. Brrr, nothing. Brrr, nothing. That's kind of who I am.
See, I'm like that on social media. I go from one platform to another.
Do you?
Before I know it, 8 hours is gone, and I'm cursing.
Yeah, well, I have to watch that. I have to watch that with Twitter, because you can just lose an inordinate amount of time, can't you?
I love you on Twitter.
Do you?
Yeah, because again, you're wordy. You're very poetic on Twitter.
Yeah,
and you're very clever, because you come back with, retorts that are just so intelligent.
I was brought up to have a good word fight. I mean, there's the fact, and Twitter's really good for me because it doesn't allow me to be completely verbose, because I can, I stutter, I use too many words. So the 140 thing really does help to make me look really concise and really considered.
You're doing well on Twitter. It's your platform.
I like it. I like it because I had such a long time of having these kind of like social assumptions made about me due to recording a song like Love Letters, or doing one thing that might have been soft. This assumption that you are this, picket fenced, sweet, edgeless, timid, broken woman that people love to think of me as, and they would report your language in that way. It's almost like sometimes people had an idea of the interview they're going to write, Like I'll have had interviews saying, tell me about a time you crashed and burned. It's like, mate, like I say, I grew up in an argumentative family, and, coming from a real French peasant family, not many English people I know have been able to take the level of quarrelsome that I enjoy. Yeah. My husband being one of them. So Twitter, when a troll comes along, it's like they don't even realise they're saving my marriage, because they give me the most perfect outlet,
Yeah. It's fantastic. The deluxe reissues, which were great. So many extra tracks there that the fans haven't had before. How do you look back? You must be very proud of your work, because it is a really kind of diverse and eclectic.
Well, I am proud of it. I'm proud of it for all of its positives and negatives. I mean, there's definitely places in there that, things in there that I wouldn't have done or I would have done differently. But everything informs the next. Everything is a learning curve, and so in that sense, you can't have had what happened later without having had what happened before. In terms of those that collection, I mean, I live in the moment, so when something's done, I rarely go back and listen to it. So I couldn't remember half of those little tracks that I've got. I've got my mate Steve Coates, who runs all my online stuff, and he's my go-to man when I can't remember what I've done. And I let him curate the extra tracks because I can't remember what they are. And it is really good. Sometimes he'd come with something and I go, no, I'm not having that. I'm not having that. But on the whole, he knows what I've done in my career where I don't.
Is it a bit of a shocker when you're reminded of certain things?
Well, sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it is, and sometimes little gems that you've completely forgotten that you'd had, and that weren't particularly noticed, so people have not reminded you about, and then you think, oh, that was a little dark moment that was lost, and so I'm quite happy to hear that again.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about doing an album on tour? Just one album? A lot of people have done that.
I would love to, but it's one of those things which is like you can't do that on the big kind of tour when you go to, and so it's kind of far more like a smaller art house thing, and so it's more problematic to organise, but it's an ambition of mine. There's about 3 or 4 albums I'd like to do in their entirety. Unfortunately, they're not always the albums that everybody wants to hear. That's where it becomes a problem. That these are kind of very they're minor albums in terms of sales.
Alison, it's fabulous to see you today again. I wish you all the best with Other. It's such a great album. And the tour, we are so looking forward to seeing you.
Oh, you must come and see me afterwards. If I can speak, I'll let those things be known. Alison is not socialising.
Wind down time.
Wind down time. Yeah.
Good to see you. See you soon.
Yeah, and to you too. Thank you.